Good morning, everyone. So, for today, we are going to continue our discussion on Introduction to Persuasive Writing. But before we proceed with our new topic for today, let us first have a recap. So, last time we discussed on persuasive writing, and there we have learned that its aims is to convince the reader to take action or simply to agree with the writer's stand. Meaning to say, persuasive writing convinces the readers or the audiences to accept a specific point of view by means of presenting arguments, reasons, and of course, evidences. The goal of persuasive writing is definitely to influence, convince, or persuade. Aside from that, we also talked about the different methods of persuasion coined by Aristotle, wherein we have learned these three. The first one is logos, in which you are trying to convince or persuade your readers or your audiences by means of using logic and reason, by means of using facts, evidences to support your argument. Aside from that, we also have ethos, which means you are using credibility or character. So you are convincing your audience by showing that the writer or the speaker is trustworthy and, of course, knowledgeable. Aside from that, we also have pathos or pathos, in which you are making use of emotions to create sympathy, happiness, or let's say anger or urgency. It has something to do with emotions. Aside from that, we also talked about the different persuasive devices that you can make use when you are trying to convince or persuade your readers or your audiences. We have facts or data. Definitely, this is based on studies and research. Aside from that, we also have anecdote, wherein this is a narrative or story about a particular person na pwede niyang gamitin in persuading. Aside from that, we also have rebuttal, which is used to oppose or disprove a statement. And lastly, we have rhetorical question, which is not meant to be answered by the readers. It is just used to challenge the readers to reflect on a particular issue. So now, let's move to the next topic, and this has something to do with the logical fallacies. So when we say logical fallacies, these are some errors in reasoning that may weaken one's argument. So when we say logical fallacy, these are flaws or errors in reasoning that weakens the argument. So if you're going to look at its surface level, it seems convincing, but it ignores valid reasoning, which may lead to, of course, invalid conclusions. Aside from that, pwede nating i-define ang logical fallacy as something that, let's say, it's a mistake in reasoning that invalidates an argument. So we people, we commit logical fallacies unintentionally when we are trying to convince others, especially when it comes to debates, speeches, or even when we are making advertisements. So now let's talk about the different logical fallacies. The first one is hasty generalization. So this means committed when the writer makes a conclusion that is based on insufficient level. So when we say hasty generalization, it means you are making a broad claim based on only limited evidences. So it is an error in reasoning because judgment is made without considering relevant facts or let's say malaking number ng mga examples. So hasty generalization also make use of, let's say, narrow sample lang, parang based on just own observation to make a broad claim. So in hasty generalization, it's like you are jumping to a universal conclusion without acknowledging reasons and backgrounds. So now let's have example. Let us have this one. Based on what I myself have observed, those who undergo surgical procedures are people who are rich but have miserable lives because of how they look. So makikita natin that this is based on observation. Kaya siya nakapaggawa ng isang claim, and here makikita natin na nag-jump lang siya sa isang universal conclusion without acknowledging reasons. So that is hasty generalization. Now let's have another example of that. We have here, I met two rude doctors at the hospital. Doctors are so arrogant. So here we can see that uh, the speaker judges an entire profession, yung mga doctors, based on just two people. Another example is this one. My neighbor's child is homeschooled and socially awkward. Homeschooling makes kids weird. So here, makikita natin that it is unfairly, or let's say unfairly generalized yung mga homeschooled children based on only one case. Another example is this one. I tried one dish from the restaurant and it was terrible. The whole menu was must be awful. So this assumes everything is bad based on just a single experience. So that is hasty generalization. Another logical fallacy is this one, red herring. So this is committed when the writer begins discussing an idea that avoids the key issue and distracts readers from it. So on this naman, it introduces irrelevant topic just to discuss the original issue. So it is like misleading in order to shift from one topic to another topic. In short, it leads attention away from the actual topic. So, nilalayo niya yung mismong topic. So, here, let us have this example. Plastic surgery can really help those who have low self-esteem because of facial deformity due to accident. But what they really need is support and constant reminder that they are beautiful no matter how they look like. So, on this statement, the relevant point here is the plastic surgery and that it helps to rebuild confidence. And then there comes this idea, or let's say distraction from the actual topic, which is about surgery. And this distraction tells that all they need is just an emotional support. So this introduced a new topic that shifts away from the original topic, which is surgery. So the first topic is surgery, and then the speaker is trying to change it into emotional support. So that is red herring. Now let's have another example, this one. Why worry about climate change when we still have millions of people who are unemployed? So, unemployment is an issue, but it is unrelated to the main topic, which is climate change. Are you getting the point? Another is this one. I know I missed the deadline, but think about how hard I've been working lately. So, it avoids responsibility by shifting attention to effort rather than the actual failure to meet the deadline. Another example is this one. Plastic surgery helps people with self esteem issues, but the real question is, why can't society just accept everyone as they are? So it shifts the conversation away from the practicality or risk of surgery to, let's say, a different philosophical debate. So that is red herring. Another logical fallacy that we have here is ad hominem. When we say ad hominem, it attacks not the reasoning or arguments of an opposing individual, but rather his or her character. So, when we say ad hominem, it's like you are attacking the person instead of addressing the argument. That's how it works. So it weakens the argument by replacing logic with, let's say, a personal criticism. So, hindi yung argument yung tinitira mo, but rather yung specific na tao. So, let's have this example. People who propagate the stigma on plastic surgery should be ashamed of themselves. They are just a bunch of jealous and insecure people who cannot afford to pay for even the cheapest surgical procedure. So here on this statement, instead of addressing the reasons, the speaker attacks the character by calling them, let's say, jealous and insecure, or mocking their status, particularly their financial status, in which it's like parang sinasabi nila na hindi lang nila afford ang magpa-surgical procedures. Something like that. So that is ad hominem. Now let's have another example. We shouldn't listen to her views on environmental protection. She doesn't even recycle. So here, it attacks the person's habit instead of her actual argument. Another example is this one. Of course, you'd say that about the school policy. You're a spoiled rich kid who never had to work for anything. So from here, it focuses on the speaker's background rather than the issue. And another is this one. Don't trust what he says about healthy eating. He's overweight. So it attacks the physical appearance rather than evaluating the truth of that person's statement. So that's how ad hominem works. Now let's have another one, and that is ad populum. So also called as bandwagon. So when we say ad populum, it is an appeal that follows the reasoning. If many or most people believe it, then it must be true. It often makes use of issues such as religion, democracy, or popularity rather than focusing on the real issue. So when we say ad populum, it is asserting that something is true because many people believed it. Parang dahil madaming naniniwala doon or madaming gumagawa ng ganon, ibig sabihin, yun na yung tama. That's how ad populum works. It's a bandwagon appeal. It's, let's say, an appeal to popularity. So, ang ad populum, it relies on the idea that if many people believe it, it must be correct. Kung madaming taong gumagawa, kung madaming taong naniniwala nun, then yun yung tama, yun yung totoo. So that's how ad populum works. Now let us have this example. Many people believe that we should learn how to be contented with what God has given us. Therefore, we should never undergo any surgical procedures. So that's an example. Another is this one. Everyone in our town supports this candidate, so he must be the best choice. So it uses popularity as proof instead of the candidate's qualifications. Another example is this one. Millions of people use this brand, so it has to be the most effective. So it is assumed that widespread use equals quality without supporting facts. Another is this one. We shouldn't change the policy. This is how we've always done it, and it's worked for generations. So this appeals to tradition and majority behavior instead of evaluating whether the policy is still effective or not. So, ganun kumilos ang ad populum. And lastly, we have here the slippery slope, which makes the assumption that a certain event or change in the status quo would bring about another, although there is not enough evidence given to support such a conclusion. So when we say slippery slope, it's like claiming a small step will lead to extreme consequence without enough evidence. So parang pag sinabing slippery slope, para siyang chain reaction. Para siyang nagkakaroon ng domino effect. Ganon yung paniniwala sa slippery slope. So, here, let's have this example. If we change beauty standards, people will stop caring about their appearance altogether, and soon society will become lazy and undisciplined. Parang siyang dramatic, something like that. So, it assumes a chain of extreme and unlikely consequences from only a small change. To make it clear, let's have more examples. So, when it comes to slippery slope, the logic follows this pattern. If A happens, then B will happen. C, then C, then disaster. But in truth, the connections between the steps are weak or not guaranteed. So, going back to the examples, let's have this. If we allow students to use calculators in class, soon they won't be able to do basic math, and eventually no one will be able to think critically. So, it assumes one change will lead to a major decline in thinking skills without a clear evidence. Another example is this one. If we legalize this drug for medical use, next people will be using it recreationally, then addiction will skyrocket and society will collapse. So it presents an extreme outcome without showing how each step inevitably follows the other. And lastly, we have this example. If we let one student retake the test, then everyone will expect the same treatment, and eventually no one will take deadlines seriously. So it assumes a single exception will lead to a total breakdown of classroom discipline. So ganun naman yung pagkilos ng slippery slope. So again, class, those are the different logical fallacies. First, we have hasty generalization. Another, we have red herring. Then we also have ad hominem, ad populum, and slippery slope. So that is our topic for today. I hope you learned something. Thank you for listening.